Excellencies, distinguished delegates, if I may request you to find your seats and be seated. We would like to begin the program momentarily. Thank you very much. If I may request you to find your seats and be seated, we would like to commence momentarily. Excellencies, if I may request you to find your seats, we would like to begin the program with an overview of the day. And we have our podium dignitaries joining us very shortly. May I request you to find your seats, please? Excellencies, good morning. We welcome you to find your seats now as we would like to begin the program. Good morning, Excellencies. May I please welcome you to be seated. Honorable Ministers, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you joining us for the high-level segment of the United Nations Environment Assembly, a warm welcome to Kenya and to the United Nations office at Nairobi. For those of you who have been here through the week or even longer, it is a pleasure to welcome you again, and congratulations to you for all the energy and effort that you have brought to these preceding days of deliberation and dialogue, setting the strongest possible foundation for the 2 decisive days that are now before us. Before I proceed any further, let me acknowledge the wonderful voices that have greeted you this morning. We are delighted to be joined today by the Kenyan Boys Choir. The Kenyan Boys Choir is a choral ensemble of talented boys drawn from high schools and colleges from around Kenya. It is dedicated to molding a world-class choral outfit that offers a platform for Kenyan boys to nurture their natural talents in music, dance, and drama, while imparting life principles of discipline, hard work, perseverance, persistence, and determination. We're privileged that they have joined us this morning to share their talent and to inspire our morning and our discussions with their music. You will, of course, hear from them again a little later. The opening ceremony of the high-level segment will be commencing very, very shortly. Again, if I may welcome you to find your seats as we're expecting His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, very shortly. But allow me to walk you through the 3-part agenda this morning. We shall begin the opening ceremony with welcoming remarks from the distinguished panel of dignitaries who will join us momentarily. We shall hear from the President of the second session of UNEA, His Excellency Edgar Gutierrez Espeleta, the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, Mr. Achim Steiner, Her Excellency Madame Ségolène Royal, President of COP21, UNFCCC, His Excellency Mr. Salaheddin Mazouar, President of COP22, UNFCCC, Mr. Jan Eliasson, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. And we shall, of course, have the pleasure of hearing from His Excellency Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya. After the welcoming remarks, and as the second part of our agenda this morning, our dignitaries on the podium, the ministers, vice ministers, and other heads of delegation, and the special guests who have been previously briefed, will be invited to proceed to the stairs immediately outside the entrance to this hall for the heads of delegation photograph. As such, I will request at the appropriate time that the ministers, vice ministers, and other heads of delegation, this means 1 person per delegation, and special guests referred to, and only those, kindly proceed as efficiently as possible, guided by our ushers, to the stairs outside. Please rest assured that the official photograph will be made available to everybody online. For reasons of both security and an orderly return to our busy agenda, may I request that all other delegates and participants kindly remain in their seats. May I also refer you, honorable ministers and other heads of delegation, to the invitation card that each delegation should have received on your tables for the photograph. May I request the honorable heads of delegation to present their card at the door as they exit the hall for the photograph. We request that only the heads of delegation holding this invitation exit the hall at the time of the photograph. Again, it is only the heads of delegation and special guests who are kindly requested to take part in the photograph. The third and final part of our opening ceremony, chaired by the President of UNEA, will comprise the briefing by the UNEP Executive Director on the state of the global environment. Thank you very much for your attention, Excellencies. And at this stage, and with only a few minutes before the arrival of His Excellency the President, may I please request you to find your seats so that we may welcome the President of the Republic of Kenya in due course. Excellencies, if I may request you to find your seats, we will be expecting the President of the Republic of Kenya very, very shortly. I welcome you to find your seats at this stage. Thank you. Good morning, Excellencies. If I may again request you to find your seats. There is progress with the arrival of our distinguished dignitaries, with the arrival of His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, and it would be excellent if I may welcome you all to be in your seats. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, good morning again. Let me yet again welcome you to find your seats. We have information that His Excellency the President of the Republic of Kenya is en route. It would be wonderful if we're all in our seats and in a position to welcome him shortly. Please, if I may request you to find your seats at this stage and to clear the corridors, the aisles. Excellencies, good morning, and yet again a warm welcome to you. May I please encourage you to find your seats and be seated. We do hope to begin very, very momentarily. Excellencies, good morning. Our distinguished dignitaries have arrived at the lobby. If I may request you please to find your seats. We will be welcoming His Excellency the President of the Republic of Kenya to this opening ceremony very, very shortly. May I please request you to find your seats and to clear the aisles. Thank you very much, Excellencies. We will be beginning in a few short minutes. Excellencies, delegates, may I request you please to find your seats. We have our dignitaries with us upstairs. They will be with us in about 3 minutes. May I please request you to find your seats and to clear the aisles. Thank you very much. Excellencies, we will be beginning in a couple of minutes. May I please request you to find your seats and to clear the aisles. Thank you very much. Yeah? Adema? Hi. He's coming. So he's coming down the stairs, or what's he doing? Okay, all right. Okay, very good. Hello. Okay. Excellencies, please rise and clear the aisles. Please rise to welcome His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta of the Republic of Kenya.
Could it be the sound of my heart? Here I am before you, reaching. Could it be? Can you hear my cry? Can you see my eyes? I am calling out to Suddenly I see arms falling, trying to find my way off the ground. Will I see the future in me as I see it sleeping away? Can you hear my cry? Can you see? I am calling. I am calling. I am calling. Can you hear? Can you hear? Can you see? I am calling. 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 Can you see? Can you hear my cry? And can you see my eyes? I am calling. I am calling. And can you see? I know you can see. I know you can see. I know you can see. I am calling.
The Kenyan Boys Choir. Your Excellency, Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya. Your Excellency, Mr. Edgar Gutierrez Espeleta, President of the Second Session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, Minister of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica. Mr. Jan Eliasson, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. Mr. Achim Steiner, United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme. Your Excellency, Madame Ségolène Royal, President of the 21st Conference of Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Minister of the Environment, Energy and Marine Affairs, and responsible for international climate relations of France. Your Excellency, Mr. Salaheddine Mazouar, President of the 22nd Conference of Parties of UNFCCC, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of the Kingdom of Morocco. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am privileged to welcome you to the United Nations Environment Programme headquarters in Nairobi and to this opening ceremony of the high-level segment of the second session of the United Nations Environment Assembly of the United Nations Environment Programme. Of course, this opening ceremony acknowledges the intense work and effort that this assemblage, representing over 170 countries as of last count, of which over 120 are represented at ministerial level, and close to 2,000 participants, have invested over the course of the past few days to get us here. I am sure that this morning's ceremony, starting with its words of welcome from our esteemed podium, including from our generous host country, the Republic of Kenya, will be a fitting start to the deliberations before you over these next 2 days. Let me take no more of your time, but invite His Excellency, Mr. Edgar Gutierrez Espeleta, President of the second session of UNEA, Minister of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica, to welcome you with his remarks. Su Excelencia.
Your Excellency, Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya. Distinguished Mr. Jan Eliasson, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency, Her Excellency, Ms. Ségolène Royal, President of COP21 of the UNFCCC, His Excellency Mr. Salim Masouel of the Kingdom of Morocco, Her Excellency Ms. Hussein Mohammed, Foreign Minister of Kenya, Mr. Mkojen Wahungu, Distinguished Mr. Elian Steiner, Executive Director of UNEP, distinguished Ministers of the Environment, distinguished heads of delegation and representatives of member states and of international organizations and civil society, ladies and gentlemen. May I begin by expressing my most sincere thanks to the people and government of Kenya for their hospitality. Also, may I commend the tremendous efforts of the UNEP team led by the Executive Director, whose hard work has guaranteed that the optimum conditions exist to ensure the success of this assembly. May I also express my commendation of all the ministers and heads of delegation for their participation in this high-level segment of the second session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. With this support and guidance, I believe that we will arrive at consensual results that will have the greatest possible impact and make a clear contribution to the UNEA to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. As we begin the second session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, we must place in perspective the challenges faced by the international community within this meeting and the fundamental objectives. We need to look at the precedents, such as the Samoa Pathway over a year ago, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction in February 2015, the adoption last September of the Action Agenda of Addis Ababa for Financing for Development, and the adoption of the Sustainable Development Agenda and the adoption of the Paris Agreement by the UN Framework Conference for Climate Change. These set the path for environmental sustainability and the crux of human effort to achieve these goals. Against this background, as we begin this section, we see the umbrella of Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Objectives as a global landwork that will change the course of the efforts of the international community towards an objective of stepping up concrete and permanent endeavours to achieve sustainable indicators of improvement in human development. In Agenda 2030, it's essential to assess the scope, measure progress, quantify remaining objectives. Of course, we can identify reasons for hope, but we cannot rest on our laurels given the length of the tasks, the list of tasks ahead of us. The words poverty, inequalities, social exclusion continue to head the list of national problems, and these are added to the complex worldwide challenges tremendous distances separate us from the objective of a life of dignity for all. And added to this is the rapid dynamic of global change, which day by day add to or lead to the emergence of new problems at a faster rate that outstrips our response capacity. The unquestionable relationship between poverty and environment requires us to, with great responsibility and exactitude, deal and identify the role of environmental policies in the context of social inequality. Currently, the majority of populations living in extreme poverty are located in rural zones where the main source of income comes from the forestry and natural resources and ecosystem-related services. Paradoxically, global studies show us that a huge percentage of these sources are subject to aggressive processes of change, degradation, and non-sustainable use, thereby eroding the capacity of ecosystems to meet the needs of populations and their territories. The efforts to conserve the environment are efforts simultaneously to combat poverty, the loss of biological diversity, shortages of water, changes in land use, and reduction of forest cover are threats to nature and to the well-being of mankind. Sustainable human development must be the objective that underpins the actions emanating from world determination to resolve these threats and challenges. We must move towards patterns of employment, production, and consumption that are genuinely sustainable. Neither hunger nor climate change can wait. We must take energetic and robust decisions. The time has come for ambitious proposals and bold solutions. It is the time to step up our historical responsibility. It is the time for new world paradigms that will indeed change the course of mankind towards a future of hope. The UNEA can make a tremendous contribution to the global agenda through cooperation and action at all levels, with the responsible and active participation of all actors in society. With the range of approaches and with innovation, I trust that we can make major contributions in identifying how we can mainstream in Agenda 2030 all these considerations. Your Excellencies, heads of delegation, ladies and gentlemen, it is pressing to ensure coherence and coordination of the entire United Nations system while simultaneously guaranteeing an appropriate accountability for member states, while improving coherence in submitting reports and stepping up efforts towards cooperation to establish or improve on the existing interinstitutional mechanisms and strategies in order to move towards integration and to boosting synergies on all fronts, leading to a strengthening and lending greater clarity to the challenges for sustainable development. As Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations, stated in his follow-up report on the Millennium Summit, whereby future action and performance for Agenda 2030 was established, he says multilateralism is being put to the test. There are no truer words. Certainly, 2030 will be the time when we will judge the quality of our political determination today. We have a mission to generate a renewed world alliance that will take advantage of the accumulated experience of the acquis that underlies the agreements that will ensure the well-being of future generations. We share a duty to incorporate in a balanced and effective manner the economic aspects of development, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability that embraces all of the international community, but that can be flexible to adapt to the different circumstances. The fine-tuning of public-private alliances, citizen participation, technological development, and access to that, strengthening of the international cooperation framework, responsible mobilization of domestic resources and encouragement of better governance. All these are essential elements in the global political debate with a view to complying with the environmental dimension of Agenda 2030 for sustainable development. The UNEP's seven cross-cutting thematic priorities coincide exactly with the most urgent global challenges and must underpin our work. UNEA-2 offers us an opportunity to reflect on these subjects and to agree on the steps to be taken to give effect to the transformational change that we need. We live in the hope of a better world and a life of dignity for ourselves and for those who come after us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. May I next welcome to the lectern the Executive Director of UNEP and Under Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Achim Steiner.
His Excellency Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya, habari asubuhi, karibu sana. Mr. Edgar Gutierrez Espeleta, the President of the United Nations Environment Assembly, Mr. Jan Eliasson, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, and if I may say so, Jan, great mentor and friend over my professional life, Madame Royale, President of COP21, and also His Excellency Mezouar, President of COP22. To my two friends and sisters, Amina and Judy, welcome and thank you for being here. To my colleagues, Saleh and Juan, thank you for the time that we have spent together here and that you are both here today to witness this high-level segment. Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, mine is simply a very brief task to once again welcome you all here to the United Nations Environment Assembly number 2, to welcome you to the world's environment capital, and to congratulate you all for having made UNEA-2 truly an example of what it means to aspire to be a universal assembly for the environment. We are very proud to have seen already thousands of actions and initiatives and people congregate on this wonderful campus here in Nairobi over the years. But from Rio Plus 20, and with the support of so many of you, the heads of state and government called for a new era in environmental governance, and it was their decision at the time to call for a universal membership assembly for the environment. You are that dream come true. For me as Executive Director, this will be the last opportunity, Your Excellency, to share a podium with you in this capacity. And I would like to express my deep appreciation and that of all of UNEP and the generations of colleagues who have gone before me for what Kenya has done for UNEP, what it has done for the United Nations, and what it will do in the future. So let me end with a short statement in Swahili, because it speaks to what I believe you also wish to happen. Babangu alinifunza kutunza mazingira ili dunia iwe mahali pazuri pa kuishi. As the father of this proud nation, Your Excellency, and also de facto as the godfather of UNEP, please look after UNEP, and it will look after you and the people of Kenya and the people of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steiner. May I now invite His Excellency Mr. Salahuddin Mezouar, President of COP22, to address us.
Excellence, Monsieur le
Your Excellency, President of Kenya, Mr. Jan Eliasson, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Achim Steiner, Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme, Ms. Ségolène Royal, my dear friend and President of COP21, Edgar Gutierrez Espeleta, Minister of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica. Ladies and gentlemen, ministers, it is a particular honor and pleasure for me to be here to participate in this second conference. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the government of the Republic of Kenya for their warm welcome and for their legendary hospitality in this magnificent country, which is an example of the dynamic renewal we are seeing today in Africa. I thank the great people of Kenya who always reserve an extremely warm welcome to their visitors. I would also like to pay a great tribute to Achim Steiner for all of the work that he has accomplished. You know, to make progress on the major causes, you need people with conviction, and you are a man of conviction, a man of beliefs. Everyone recognizes your passion for the work that you have conducted to make headway in issues of climate change and the environment, but also to make sure that we could move from a program to an institution, a major transformation. In all friendship, I would like to express my great esteem for your work, and I think Achim deserves our applause. I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate Eric Solem on his appointment and, of course, to wish him every success in this new mission. We will all be alongside him because we are talking about a major challenge. We are talking about a challenge of a global scale which concerns all of humanity, which concerns every single individual. The 2030 Agenda is an ambitious one, but it is the fruit of consensus. And it emphasizes the problems of the 21st century, and the problems of the 21st century are clear. We need greater solidarity, greater commitment, greater determination. We need to change our operational mode, change our way of thinking. We need to move on from the 20th century logic of domination rather than balance to move towards a more harmonious planet. And harmony means two fundamental concepts. It means that we bring an end to exclusion and poverty, to take a closer look at the most vulnerable people in our world, to accept to share our wealth. The world can no longer carry on at its current rhythm. It cannot accept such an acute lack of balance. It also means that the other threat hanging over us, which is that of climate change, requires greater determination and greater commitment. We are talking about a paradigm shift. We are talking about a new civilization, a new world which is more egalitarian, which is more open, which is a little bit more balanced for humanity's sake. 2015 saw two major events which I think marked a real change in the world's mindset of course, the 2030 Agenda with the Sustainable Development Goals, placing the emphasis on development and combating poverty, but also climate change issues and environmental issues, but also the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement emerged from a consensus which was accepted, which demonstrates commitment from the international community, and also that the international community has become aware of these issues. This is very important, and this has then led to the ratification in April in New York of the Paris Agreement. What is the world looking for today? The world is looking for action. And action must be acting on COP21, and this is why Morocco is delighted to have the honour of hosting COP22, and COP22 must build on the Paris Agreement. Morocco was asking itself what we could do to build on this. A spirit has been created, the Paris spirit. Despite some divergences which still exist, there is a real spirit which we now have, and we need to encourage this spirit. We need to, of course, stay within the mission of the organising country of the COP22. We need to respect the procedures and so on, but we also need to mark the start of something new. Our conviction that we have shared with most of you is that COP22 has to be the COP of action. It has to be the COP of the start of implementation, to move forward with strong messages, strong signals, so that this dynamic spirit be credible. I used the term credible because there have been many promises which unfortunately have not materialized. And the key question today is how we can accelerate the action agenda. We have a few proposals concerning those who are most vulnerable today, of course. The small island developing states, the least developed countries, Africa, Latin America, Asia. There are great expectations there, but today the real triptych, the real issues that we need to look at, that we need to make headway on, are of course issues of financing. We have done a great deal of work to look at the different methods and modes of financing today. We've gone through them very carefully, and there are so many different mechanisms: governmental, non-governmental, institutional, and so on and so forth. So many different mechanisms that we need to find some coherency, some logic, and we need to look at what our relationship can be with you. I think we need to have a one-stop shop, a single window, which will allow for projects to find funding. Everyone talks about money, but money is there, and we need to look at what has been financed for some projects. It's not in this way that the world is going to make progress with the small number of projects that we have seen. We need to have a mechanism established which will really stand up and be able to provide that financing. Then we need to do capacity building, skills upgrading. We must make headway on this subject. This is not just something we will talk about, it is reality. We need to establish some mechanisms which allow us to make headway in sharing our knowledge, in pooling our knowledge. This is fundamental if we want to make the Paris Agreement credible. Technology transfer. That is another fundamental pillar that we need to make progress on. If I'm saying this, it is because I come myself from the private sector, a very real world, a private sector which has been active in change and transformation. And I think, therefore, that the major challenge we have today is to move from words to deeds. We need to demonstrate more solidarity, and we need not to just pass the burden to shift responsibility from one person to another. We need to move towards action. Action in solidarity, responsible action. We are in a world, in a paradigm where we can only win. There can be no losers. In the world that we want to build, which has more solidarity, is better balanced, is one which will open up prospects and give us hope. These prospects, this hope, must be fueled by us, must be given their strength by us and lived up to. And so, together, we want to make COP22 a success. It is with you and thanks to you that we are going to be able to make COP22 the COP of the start of implementing the Paris COP, to make it credible, to give it meaning, to associate as far as possible and evermore all stakeholders, NGOs, civil society, because they are vital stakeholders for us to make headway on this project for humanity. Other projects and proposals will be submitted. Of course, solar energy, all the issues related to agriculture. These are projects which have meaning, which can provide answers. They are ones which can be mastered. They are ones which can be identified. And of course, naturally, we need to make sure that they have the associated financing, which is always a key issue. I would like to conclude now. I don't want to monopolize the floor here. I apologize for being a little bit too long. But I want to conclude by saying, purely and simply, that Morocco will be greatly honored to welcome you to Marrakesh. For those of you who know Marrakesh, it is the ochre city. It is the African Arab city, which is a place of welcome, which is at a crossroads between the west and the east, the north and the south. We look forward to everyone making an active contribution to consolidating global efforts to combat climate change. Thank you very much indeed for your kind attention, and I'm counting on your commitment and your contributions. Morocco will listen to you. Morocco will be there to serve you, to serve this noble cause for all of us and for this continent that we belong to, Africa, and for this South-South world, not excluding the North, of course, but working with the North. That is what we want to symbolize through COP22. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. May I now invite Her Excellency, Madame Ségolène Royal, President of COP21, to address the Assembly.
Excellencies, Monsieur le Président de
President of the Republic of Kenya, Your Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, President, Under-Secretary General, Executive Director, future President of the COP, Ministers, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. You have come here at a very important point in time because this is a very important landmark after the Paris Conference on Climate Change. And I'm greatly honoured to be here with you today as President of COP21. With more than 150 Ministers of the Environment who are here today, it's the largest meeting of Ministers of the Environment under the auspices of the United Nations. This is a major event because I can feel that the Paris spirit is still here, and I'm doubly delighted to be here, President, in Africa, which is a continent close to my heart, which also, I should say, means that I'm very happy to be here. You, on the 30th of April, committed a very heroic act because you destroyed some 30 tons of elephant tusks and rhinoceros horn. This is a very strong and powerful gesture and act which was seen by the whole world. And I would like to congratulate you once again, President. It was a very powerful signal indeed. On the 30th of April, I committed myself to prohibiting trade in ivory and import of ivory into France. I signed the ministerial decree on this, and I have called upon Europe to do the same thing. The Paris Climate Change Conference was an important turning point, and today it is your responsibility, it's your mandate to contribute to implementing the Paris Agreement. We have a very important cycle of events because 2015 was a landmark year for the climate change issues. We had the Sendai Conference on disaster risk reduction and prevention and the Addis Ababa Conference on financing for development. We had the conference on the Sustainable Development Goals in New York, and we had the Paris Climate Change Conference. A few days ago, we had the first global conference on humanitarian issues, the World Summit, on the initiative of the United Nations, and we were able to link the issue of climate change and the issue of humanitarian crisis. And I had an opportunity during a panel on preventing climate change crisis, presided over by the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, who's here with us today. I had the opportunity to say that acting for the climate is acting at the very roots of these issues, because climate change issues lead to humanitarian crisis and lead to wars. Climate change issues lead to conflict, and when we analyse the conflicts and wars which have taken place over the last few years, we see that all of them are linked to some extent to climate change. Drought has led to food crisis and crisis in access to drinking water. This leads to hunger, to rioting, to population movements, desertification, deforestation on a massive scale. The difficulties of having access to food resources provoke massive population migrations, in particular south-south migration. And the African continent is particularly hit by this south-south migration, which is destabilizing for states. And we consider that if nothing is done to combat the negative impact of climate change, we will have hundreds of million climate change migrants by the end of the century. So this just underscores the violence, the importance of what you're doing here today. So I have several messages. The first message is to accelerate implementation of the Paris Agreement. To accelerate it, we mobilise ourselves to have signatories to it. With the United Nations and the presidency of COP, we had 177 countries signing. This is a record. This has never been seen before. They came to sign the Paris Agreement in April in New York. So we need to carry on with this dynamic development. We need to accelerate with the ratification procedures. So I call upon all the members of government here present to keep a careful eye on the ratification process, to make sure that the Paris Agreement ratification be on the agenda of your Council of Ministers, that the ratification of the Paris Agreement be on the agenda of your parliaments, be part of their procedures, to make sure that each state ratifies it. Because in Marrakesh, for COP22, we have to do our duty. We need to make sure that when we go to Marrakesh, we have a Paris Agreement which is applied. What does that mean? It means that 55 parties have to have ratified it, representing 55% of the greenhouse gas emissions. The ideal, of course, would be that it should be many more states for this agreement to come into force this year, and for those countries which have signed up to the Paris Agreement, who came to sign it with heads of state and government present, be able during this year to ratify the Paris Agreement. It is your duty. This is a duty for those countries which are suffering. This is your duty given the populations who are suffering. It is a duty given the vulnerable countries around the globe. Very often, the most vulnerable countries, the most fragile countries, have already ratified the Paris Agreement. 14 of them have already deposited their ratification instruments. And amongst these 14 countries, we have small island developing states who are threatened in their very survival by the negative impact of climate change. So all states should make these efforts. And you, the Ministers of the Environment here present, who provide advice to your governments, have this responsibility, this duty, when you go back home from Nairobi, to say to the head of your government, to your governments, that the President of COP asked us to ratify this. We have this duty given the states suffering from climate change. We have a duty given our commitment in Paris. We have this duty given those who are in despair, who want to see if we are courageous enough to take action to make sure that we keep global warming under 2% by the end of the century. This is an exceptional mission that we have. It is a responsibility that we will never have again. It is something we need to be aware of. This responsibility, this great political duty we have. In the Paris Agreement, in the efforts that all countries of the world made through this collective effort to finalize this agreement, we were able to bring together very different countries, large ones, small ones, rich ones, poor ones, northern countries, southern countries, those who had already started to act, some who are only just coming to these issues. So in this multilateralism, we have a community of ideas. We have scientific knowledge sharing, and we really need to pay tribute to the world's scientists who established the link between human activities and the use of fossil fuels and climate change and climate disasters. All of this work, which has been underway for 25 years since Rio, must now accelerate, and we need to implement this. I know you're aware of it, and I know that this Nairobi meeting will be a success. The second message I have, so that was the first message, the ratification and implementation of the agreement. The second message is a simple one. It is crucial, and that is a call for action. What is it? Well, firstly, it is that every country start to act within its national territory to apply the agreement. We need to make sure that this is done. We see that many countries are moving along these lines. In Kenya, for example, there are very clear commitments on a shift to renewable energy. And I will be able to talk about this tomorrow, the efforts of Africa to invest in renewable energy. So I'll be able to talk to the African Development Bank's meeting about this tomorrow. Then there's all of the coalitions as well. All of the coalitions are being structured. All of the coalitions we had during the Paris Agreement, 70 coalitions around oceans, forests, agriculture, water, renewable energy sources, of course, and also coalitions around territorial areas, women as well, who were very active, as women are often the most vulnerable to climate change and have solutions. If we give them the power to take action, they can do a great deal, in particular in the agricultural sector and in the sphere of access to drinking water. I would like to commend the action of UNEP to the action plan and its support for many different important initiatives, such as the Coalition on Mercury and the platform to deal with climate change. UNEP is directly involved in this as the Secretariat of the Montreal Protocol. I'd also commend the role of UNEP in the Sustainable Energy Initiative for all of the UN, with several initiatives on energy efficiency, and there are several meetings on this during this assembly. Also, there's the wonderful initiative of UNEP on the establishment of the urban network with more than 7,000 cities and regions around the world who have committed themselves to working on climate issues, and the coalition of buildings that I shall take part in later on. Then I'd like to give you some news as to the Bonn negotiations, because you know that the representatives of the parties spent 10 days in Bonn just now for the first formal negotiating session since Paris. Mr. Saladin Mezouar opened these negotiations, and the negotiators, I can say, in Bonn have worked very well. COP22 in Marrakesh will prepare for the application of the entry into force of the Paris Agreement. I made sure that NGOs and observers and civil society were consulted as well. They have a great deal to say, and they do a great deal too. We need to also make sure that we fully tackle the issue of tariffs on carbon fuels. I will call upon all the representatives of governments here today to join the coalition on carbon tariffs, as this is a key lever which will really allow us to re-inject this issue into investment policies, and this should then allow us to really establish what everyone is hoping we will do, to establish the $100 billion by 2020 for projects. There is progress. We have 60 billion. We will reach this target. So we will make sure that the public and private resources are there. It's quite clear that in the coalition we have enterprises and investment funds. That's very new in the climate change conferences. We have a coalition, a structure now around climate issues of these investors. We see that investing in green growth is now an opportunity. That is very positive. Of course, we have disasters and catastrophes, but there's also wonderful opportunities here, because a lever for development is green growth, renewable energy. We have new means of transport, new means of building, constructing buildings, new ways to consume natural resources, and these all present wonderful opportunities. They are job generators. They can support startups, SMEs, and this is how we can prepare the future for young people. We can work on this in all of our countries, which unfortunately suffer the painful burden of unemployment. So we need to work on this. There is a well-known Kenyan proverb which says we need to save and look after our planet, because it was only lent to us by our children. And this is what we need to focus on. We need to work with young people to make sure that they can live in this planet in better conditions, so that we can pass on to them a rejuvenated planet, a planet which is in a good state, which will allow them to find harmony between human beings and the natural environment which surrounds them. On this African environment that we need to encourage, to fight against lobbying and financial voracity and greed, the excessive exploitation of resources or the destruction of protected animals. We need courage. We need courage to be part of this movement. Courage is needed to stand up to powerful lobbies. We require courage to make progress here. We need to think about others before we think about ourselves. We need to build a world that we might never live in. This is political courage. This is the noble task that we have, that we share. As Nelson Mandela said, I have learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to overcome fear. So thank you very much indeed for committing yourself with so much energy, so much commitment, determination, with a sense of sacrifice as well, to think about others before yourselves. So thank you very much for that.
Many thanks, Your Excellency. It is now my great honor to welcome the remarks of Mr. Jan Eliasson, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations.
Your Excellency, President Uhuru Kenyatta of the Republic of Kenya, Minister Edgar Gutierrez Espeleta, President of UNEA, Madame la Présidente COP21, Ségolène Royal, incoming President Salehuddin Mezouar, COP22, Executive Director Steiner, Cabinet Secretaries Amina Mohammed and Judy Wahungu, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear friends. I am glad and I would say even inspired to be back at UN headquarters in Nairobi in Kenya. I'm honored to be with you today representing the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon at this crucially important assembly. UNEA is the world's foremost decision-making body on the environment. You bring together ministers of environment of all member states, record number here today, as well as key representatives from the private sector, civil society, and the scientific community. Universal membership of UNEP has further built Nairobi's stature as a major United Nations headquarters. Congratulations to both United Nations and to the Republic of Kenya. The decisions you will take at this assembly are critical for the well-being of our generation and future generations. By working to safeguard our planet, you are laying the foundation for peace, prosperity, and dignity for all. We have now entered a new era in that historic pursuit. Last year, world leaders adopted the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the Paris Agreement on climate change. Last month, we sustained that momentum at a historic ceremony at UN headquarters in New York. 175 member states signed the Paris Agreement in one single day, more than any treaty or agreement in the history of the United Nations. I support strongly Ségolène Royal's call for ratification of this agreement. Taken together, these milestones form an ambitious agenda and a foundation for transformative change. I commend the member states, all of you, for this extraordinary achievement, not least for coming together at a time of serious divisions on conflicts and other challenges that we see around us in the world. I commend the French leadership in the Paris Agreement, the work for the December meeting. I also want to, here in this room, commend the efforts of Kenya. Kenya and Ireland were the co-facilitators of the negotiations for a long period. They did a tremendous work. And I also want to commend the Minister of Environment, who is in this room, Amina Mohammed of Nigeria, who was at the side of the Secretary General and myself during this 3.5 years of arduous negotiations leading up to the SDG agreements. This second session of UNEA will play a critical role in launching and strengthening the environmental dimension of the 2030 Agenda. The SDGs, the goals, cover important elements related to the environment, and I think of areas like water and sanitation, energy and climate change, oceans, ecosystems, sustainable consumption and production, human settlements and transport. Let me say, our path is clear, our destination is set. Our challenge, our job, our task is to move decisively, quickly and concretely from aspiration to action. Dear delegates, if we are to achieve these far-reaching goals, it will be necessary to take a more comprehensive and more holistic approach in our work. We must mobilize from now on a broad spectrum of partners. We must build bridges to other functional areas in governments, in parliaments, in our civil society work, in business. We have to work horizontally rather than vertically in the silos. But we are also in need of countering the vested interest and the many entrenched attitudes which still prevail. Moving away from fossil fuel, for instance, will be difficult. We know that. But we all know also that promising alternatives exist. And there is also this false notion that we must choose between economic growth and environmental protection. This still prevails. Old habits die hard, and old powerful interests do not cede ground willingly. I urge all delegates here to approach your solemn responsibilities with courage, with foresight, and with wisdom. Your decisions will have profound and lasting consequences. I have, during my professional life, mediated in many conflicts. You now have an opportunity, if I may say so, to mediate peace with nature. Peace with nature. An historic negotiation. Early this month, during a visit that I made to the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, I saw some of the devastating impacts of both climate change and of the El Niño effect, from drought and rising sea levels to the salt water contaminating freshwater sources and causing erosion of coastal areas. I saw it with my own eyes. This problem is not a problem 60, 80, 100 years away from now. It's here and now. And all these factors that I mentioned are major threats to jobs, homes, natural resources, and food. Years of hard-won progress are at risk. This is an area of 18 million people. It's not 200,000 on Maldives. It's a whole existence of a part of a country which is at stake. And that's only one example right now. I know that here, and I want to commend you, Mr. President, for your leadership in this. In the Nairobi National Park, the Kenya Wildlife Service recently organized the largest ever public burning of ivory and rhino horn as a protest against poaching and the illegal trade in wildlife. Wildlife trafficking is increasingly linked to organized crime and non-state armed groups, extremists, even terrorist groups. These dangerous and ruthless forces undermine the rule of law, threaten national security, and degrade ecosystems, and must be challenged and confronted. Yesterday, UNEP's Symposium on Environment and Displacement highlighted the links between resource stress, conflict, displacement, and migration. The first ever World Humanitarian Summit earlier this week in Istanbul, which I attended, underscored the extent of such humanitarian disasters, man-made as well as natural. I draw two overarching conclusions from these examples. First, we must work in much more integrated and horizontal way, as I said earlier. Environmental concerns are inextricably connected to economic considerations, to social development, to human rights, to the rule of law, and indeed to matters of peace and security. We should all be very encouraged that the 2030 Agenda recognizes the indivisible nature of the goals. Their unifying features are universality and sustainability. One of our greatest challenges now is to combine the implementation of SDGs with the making reality of the Paris Agreement. Second, we must redouble our efforts at prevention, whether to combat global climate change, build resilience, or address potential conflicts early on, before they reach a tipping point. The cost for humanitarian emergency relief is about $20 billion a year, greatly exceeds the amount we spend on conflict prevention, peace building, and post-conflict programs. Sadly, a similar tale could be told should we cross critical level environmental thresholds. Here I would like to stress the importance of partnership. The number and diversity of all of you taking part in UNEA, being in this room today, already mark an important step towards the goal 617, which is, and I quote, to revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development, end quote. Innovation from the civil society, from the scientific world, and not least from the private sector, will be critical if we are to address the challenges of global development. For the private sector, let me add, though, that We should also remember that sustainable development is equally necessary for the private sector if it will be able to thrive in the future. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, in a very real sense, 2016, this year, is even more demanding than 2015. This year we begin the hard work translating our declarations into national planning and local realities, and there where you have a very important role, you ministers gathered in this room. At long last, the environment is being elevated to its rightful place in national and international policy making. Such an evolution of mindset creates enormous opportunity for all of us. Let us seize the moment and work together to deliver a sustainable future for people and for the planet. Now, in closing, with the permission of you, Mr. President, and with you all present here, I would like to take a moment, like the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Morocco, to pay tribute to our dear friend and colleague, the departing Executive Director Achim Steiner, who has been so instrumental in bringing UNEP and UNEA to where we are today. Under Achim's uniquely able and inspiring leadership, UNEP has raised the profile of environment in the international discourse. He has presented environmental solutions and approaches with tremendous effect and promise. Achim has been an eloquent and committed champion of the green economy as a means to have a more resilient, more equitable, and more prosperous future. This helped shape the Rio +20 outcome and the 2030 agenda. Under his leadership, UNEP strongly supported the COP process and contributed to the historic agreement on climate change last December. So I want to thank you, Achim, for your vision, for the values that you stand for your lasting contribution to environmental awareness and to the struggle to protect nature and preserve the earth. We wish you the very best in your future endeavors. Since Minister Mizwar also mentioned the successor, I had no prepared remarks. There will be plenty of opportunities to welcome Eric Solheim on his new role as Executive Director. But let me only assure you, and I speak from experience, assure you that Eric is a man of convictions, a man steeped in traditions of solidarity, and with unique experience from the world of development and the world of environment. I just want to, at this stage, to welcome you on board for this voyage that we all have ahead of us. It's a serious and crucial voyage for all of us and for generations to come. I thank you very much.
Our deepest gratitude for your words, Mr. Eliasson. I am now very privileged to welcome His Excellency, the Head of State and Government of the host country of UNEP's headquarters, His Excellency Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya, to address us.
Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Mr. Edgar Guterres Espeleta, President of this Assembly, Mr. Achim Steiner, Executive Director, Your Excellency, Mr. Mezwar, President of COP22, Your Excellency and good friend Ségolène Royal, President of COP21, Mr. Jan Eliasson, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let me at the very onset take this opportunity to welcome you all to Nairobi, the capital city of our Republic, and indeed the home of the United Nations Environmental Programme, as well as the home of the environment, and to say in Swahili, karibuni to all of you, and Kenya is proud to host you, and we hope that you have an enjoyable stay in our wonderful country. Indeed, as a country, we feel truly honored to host this important forum, the second session of the United Nations Environmental Assembly, UNEA-2, of the United Nations Environmental Programme. And indeed, we are proud to be partnering with all of you towards the protection of our planet and the prosperity of all our people. Let me, as a second point, take this early opportunity to thank most sincerely our outgoing Executive Director of UNEP, Mr. Achim Steiner, for the commendable work he has done at the helm of this esteemed organization. Indeed, Achim, your wisdom and devotion to duty has undoubtedly strengthened the United Nations Environmental Programme and indeed helped our world make commendable progress in addressing environmental challenges that we all face. Kenya will undoubtedly miss you, but we wish you well as you move on. And as I told you, wherever life takes you, always remember you have a home here in Kenya. And to our incoming director, Mr. Eric Solem, we are confident that you are also more than equal to the task, and I want to assure you of my government's unequivocal support to you, our best wishes. We welcome you here to Nairobi, and I look forward to a warm and productive partnership with yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, this forum is part of a rapidly growing global consensus on the preeminence of environmental issues. That consensus has become increasingly evident through the Sustainable Development Goals, about half of which have a direct link to the issue of environmental sustainability. The Addis Ababa Action Agenda of 2030 on sustainable development and the Paris Agreement on climate change are all evidence of this. Ladies and gentlemen, over the last 2 decades, we have seen across the world a movement emerge saying that the environment can no longer be a tertiary concern, that building a sustainable, shared future cannot be an afterthought, that we have to be ready and willing to make selfless sacrifices today if we want to leave our children and our grandchildren a viable and better world tomorrow. Today, your presence at this critical convening adds momentum to that movement. It lends credibility to that cause and amplifies the urgency of the issue that we are discussing. I am grateful to the United Nations Environmental Assembly for leveraging your influence and resources to safeguarding our environment and our world. And I am glad that this meeting is happening here on the African continent. With so many of our countries in Africa dependent on agriculture and tourism, amongst many things, yet as a continent facing challenges of poverty and food security, Africa really has the most to lose through environmental degradation. and climate change. But also, it is the continent that has the most to gain by mitigating these challenges. In some ways, African countries are the biggest stakeholders in sustainability. I hope that through this forum, more and more countries on our continent will prioritize the environment and receive the necessary support to make appropriate investments, whether those investments are soft, as in legislative and policy framework and civic education, or hard investments in creating a more sustainable energy infrastructure across the continent. I am personally proud to inform this gathering that we, as a country, have taken steps to secure a sustainable and resilient planet. We have and continue to invest substantial amounts of financial resources towards renewable energy. We are seeking to harness geothermal, wind, water, and in future, the sun to power our country and our region. Earlier this year, Kenya, like many of your countries, signed the Protocol on Climate Change following the adoption of the Paris Agreement last year. We adopted a green economy strategy and implementation plan as a guideline for our environmental sustainability efforts, and even as we submitted our national commitments to the United Nations Framework for Climate Change. But a critical part of our environmental conservation efforts is our stand against poaching and the illegal trade in wildlife, as well as wildlife products. On April 30th of this year, we held a Giants Club summit here in Nairobi, and together with colleagues from Africa, torched 105 tons of ivory and 1.3 tons of rhino horn, representing more than 8,000 elephants and about 1,000 rhinos. The aim was to demonstrate to the world that ivory is worthless unless it is on our elephants. I take this opportunity to appreciate the overwhelming support we received, especially from Ms. Ségolène Royal, President of the Bureau of COP21, the European Union, the United States of America, my brothers President Ali Bongo Ondimba of Gabon and Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, the Elephant Range countries, and even the support that we got from countries that are markets for wildlife products. During the 17th meeting of the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wildlife, Fauna and Flora, CITES, set to be held in South Africa later this year, Kenya will be seeking a total ban on the trade in ivory, and we hope that you can stand with us as we seek to take this critical step to preserve the animals that contribute so much to our ecosystems and way of life. I take this opportunity to thank you, Madame Royal, for what France has done in support of this cause. Thank you very much. Ultimately, preserving our environment really does require a multiplicity of initiatives and the work of many stakeholders, as this meeting itself demonstrates. I hope that we can continue to embrace a bipartisan cooperation between a variety of interests, between public and private sectors, between UN bodies, and between governments and the non-governmental organizations as well, so that we can accelerate progress on environmental issues. At the end of the day, this world belongs to all of us, and we will win or lose it together. In that spirit, I also urge us to leverage the Habitat 3 conference that is coming up in October 2016 in Quito, Ecuador, as an opportunity to adapt an all-inclusive, integrated, comprehensive, and transformative agenda on human settlements that complement the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. As we find more ways to connect initiatives and outcomes, our work on building our world will be better for it. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I take this opportunity to wish all of you very fruitful deliberations over the next few days and look forward to supporting the actionable outcomes agreed to at this forum. And let me once again reiterate my government's commitment to supporting the ideals of UNEP and to working closely with the program to facilitate the smooth implementation of its mandate. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Our sincerest thanks, Your Excellency, for your words and for your presence here today at this ceremony. In spite of a very heavy schedule, we appreciate your presence, Excellency. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, may I invite our distinguished podium, followed by the honorable ministers and other heads of delegation, to now make their way to the stairway just outside the hall for the UNEA-2 heads of delegation photograph. May I request all other delegates to remain seated as our very special dignitaries and heads of delegation proceed for the photograph. With the exception of the heads of delegation, may I kindly request participants once again please to remain seated. Thank you very much.
Jambo, jambo bwana, habari gani? Nzuri sana, wageni wakaribishwa Kenya yetu, hakuna matata, sote jambo. Jambo, jambo bwana, habari gani? Nzuri sana, wageni wetu, wageni wakaribishwa Kenya yetu, hakuna matata. Kenya nchi nzuri, hakuna matata. Nchi yenye amani, hakuna matata. Tena nchi yenye wanyama wengi, hakuna matata. Nchi yenye upendo, hakuna matata. Kenya nchi nzuri, hakuna matata. Tena nchi yenye amani, hakuna matata. Tena nchi yenye amani, hakuna matata. Nchi yenye upendo, hakuna matata. Sote jambo, jambo, jambo bwana, habari gani? Wageni wetu, wakaribishwa Kenya yetu, hakuna matata. Sote jambo, habari gani? Wageni wetu, wakaribishwa, hakuna matata. Kenya nchi nzuri, nchi yenye amani, tena nchi yenye wanyama wengi, nchi yenye upendo. Kenya nchi nzuri, tena nchi yenye upendo, tena nchi yenye wanyama wengi, nchi yenye upendo. Sote jambo, jambo bwana, habari gani? Wageni wetu, wakaribishwa, hakuna matata. Sote jambo, jambo bwana, habari gani? Wageni wetu, wakaribishwa, hakuna matata. Kenya nchi nzuri, hakuna matata. Tena nchi yenye amani, hakuna matata. Nchi yenye wanyama wengi, hakuna matata. Nchi yenye upendo, hakuna matata. Kenya nchi nzuri, hakuna matata. Tena nchi yenye amani, hakuna matata. Nchi yenye wanyama wengi, hakuna matata. Nchi yenye upendo. Sote jambo, jambo, jambo bwana, habari gani? Nzuri sana, wageni wetu, wakaribishwa Kenya yetu, hakuna matata. Sote jambo, jambo bwana, habari gani? Nzuri sana, wageni wetu, wakaribishwa Kenya yetu, hakuna matata.
Brere fane dori ndo brere yanko veranga brere mama yanko vera brere yanko veranga fane dori ndo brere yanko veranga brere mama yanko vera brere yanko veranga brere fane dori ndo brere yanko veranga brere mama yanko vera brere yanko veranga fane dori ndo brere yanko veranga brere mama yanko vera brere yanko veranga he mai chibani nse mwene sagala he mai chibani nse mwene sagala he mai
Aneno koblo gilong marachar aworo yawa aworo koblo orwakolong marachar nango aneno koblo gilong marachar aworo sana aworo koblo orwakolong marachar nango aneno koblo gilong marachar aworo yawa aworo koblo orwakolong marachar nango aneno koblo gilong marachar aworo sana aworo
bayayeko.
Mwana wa Meri Mishikoero.
Mwana wa Meri bayaye.
Mwana wa Meri
bayayeko.
Mwana wa Meri Mishikoero.
Reri mafura kamwakula.
Mwana wa Meri
Humashe mwana.
Mwana wa Meri Mishikoero.
Reri mafura kamwakula.
Mwana wa Meri
Humashe mwana.
Mwana wa Meri Mishikoero. Mwana wa Meri bayaye. Mwana wa Meri
bayayeko.
Mwana wa Meri Mishikoero. Mwana wa Meri bayaye. Mwana wa Meri
bayayeko.
Mwana wa Meri Mishikoero. Mwana wa Meri bayaye. Mwana wa Meri
bayayeko.
Mwana wa Meri Mishikoero. Mwana wa Meri bayaye. Mwana wa Meri
bayayeko.
Mwana wa Meri Mishikoero.
Konga butswa Syria konga butswa konga butswa Syria konga butswa konga butswa Syria konga butswa konga butswa bana Syria konga butswa Syria konga butswa 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 yanza butswa Syria yanza butswa yanza butswa Syria yanza butswa yanza butswa Syria yanza butswa yanza butswa bana Syria yanza butswa konga butswa Syria konga butswa konga butswa Syria yanza butswa konga butswa Syria yanza butswa konga butswa bana Syria yanza butswa
Sleeping on a midnight lake. Homeless, homeless. Moonlight sleeping on a midnight lake. Homeless, homeless, moonlight sleeping on a midnight lake. Homeless, homeless, moonlight sleeping on a midnight lake.
Zio yami, zio yami, zio yami, zio yami, zio yami bo, zio yami, zio yami, zio yami, zio yami, zio yami bo. Strong winds, mama way. Strong winds, many days, many days. Strong winds, many days tonight. Strong winds, mama way. Strong winds, many days, many days. Strong winds, many days tonight. Tululu. Lulu, tululu, 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 Somebody say
Somebody say, hello, hello, hello. Somebody say, somebody cry, why, why? Somebody say, hello, hello, hello. Somebody say, somebody cry. Homeless, 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 moonlight sleeping on a midnight lake. Homeless, 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 moonlight sleeping on a midnight lake. Homeless, 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 moonlight sleeping on a midnight lake. Homeless, 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 moonlight sleeping on a midnight lake. Zio yami, zio yami, zio yami, zio yami, zio yami bo, zio yami, zio yami, zio yami, zio yami, zio yami, zio yami bo. Tulululu, lulu, tulululu, 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 tulululu. Jesus Shami, Jesus Shami, oh.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, if I may request you to find your seats, the third segment of the opening ceremony will commence shortly. May I welcome you to find your seats. Thank you. Excellencies, if I may request you to take your seats, we would like to recommence our proceedings this morning. May I please welcome you to take your seats. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, may I call the meeting to order. If I may request you to take your seats, please, we would like to recommence our morning's program. May I please request you to take your seats. May I welcome you to take your seats, please. We would like to begin the third segment of our program this morning. That worked better. Excellencies, please find your seats. We would like to begin. Let me at this stage hand the session over to His Excellency Mr. Edgar Gutierrez Espeleta, President of the second session of UNEA.
Well, thank you. Please be seated. Please be seated. I wish to invite now Mr. Ahim Steiner, UNEP Executive Director, to share with us a briefing on the state of the environment. Mr. Steiner, you have the floor.
Mr. President, honorable ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I begin with a quote that I will reveal in a moment when it was made and by whom. Our purpose here is to reconcile man's legitimate immediate ambitions with the rights of others, with respect for all life-supporting systems, and with the rights of generations yet unborn. Our purpose is the enrichment of mankind in every sense of that phrase. We wish to advance not recklessly, ignorantly, selfishly, perilously, as we have done in the past, but with greater understanding, wisdom, and vision. We are anxious, and rightly so, to eliminate poverty, hunger, disease, racial prejudice, and the glaring economic inequalities between us as human beings. These are the words of our leader and friend, the late Maurice Strong. These were not the words at the end of his career, no, they were the words in 1972 at the Stockholm Conference, when the world first began to look at the environmental issues as a global community, and when also UNEP was born. I want to begin my policy statement by remembering the leaders of our community, and in particular Maurice Strong and also Mustafa Tolba, the founding fathers, so to speak, of the United Nations Environment Programme. Maurice Strong, the first executive director, Mustafa Tolba, the second executive director. They became not only leaders of the United Nations Environment Programme, they were true leaders and mentors of an environmental community across the whole globe. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, you have already heard this morning what a remarkable, unprecedented year 2015 was if you cared about the future of development and in particular also sustainable development. I think if you're an environmental policymaker or an environmental NGO or an environmental scientist in the year 2016, you should be excited. You should be excited by the thresholds we have crossed, the milestones we have passed, and what the significance and the meaning of Agenda 2030 or the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement, Addis Ababa, Sendai, and behind them many other agreements represent to the future. Our challenge, however, is equally daunting. What Paris seeks to help the world achieve, what the 2030 Agenda has set out, requires extraordinary changes. We live truly in an age of transformation, untested in its ambition, unprecedented in its scale, and never before sought to achieve in such a short period of time. I will not dwell on it for long because you know the numbers, you know the targets, you know the metrics, but just to think of decarbonizing our economies over the next 50 to 60 years, trying to make poverty a thing of the past, addressing the many other metrics that basically show us that we are far from achieving sustainable development as a global community today, will require so many new approaches and efforts. But, you know, sometimes we also need to look back and we need to recognize that in these 4 decades or 5 decades, and some would say perhaps 100 years, of trying to change that narrative that the arrival of the human species in the modern industrial age is always automatically an equation in which environment loses, and yes, also very often equity in our society becomes more marked and marred by inequity. We may not be able to change the world overnight, but nor must we only focus on problems that increase by an order of magnitude until they seem to create fear rather than progress. In presenting to you today the policy statement of the Executive Director, I would like to just for a moment reflect on these last 44 years as a time horizon in which UNEP has been part of the story of environmental change on our planet. We have learned many lessons. Today we have a body of international conventions and protocols that span the globe, that have tried to address some of the most immediate priorities that we have identified, whether it is the illegal trade in wildlife, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, whether it is the Vienna Convention and the Montreal Protocol that helped us to repair the ozone hole and now stands ready to help us also address the much larger challenge of greenhouse gases, and how the solution to one problem we created may now become a far larger problem to another challenge, global warming. And yet we have an instrument. We have the Montreal Protocol, and through the Dubai pathway we may very well this year see another major milestone being achieved. We have the Chemicals Conventions and Waste, Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm, the Ramsar Convention, the Rio Conventions. I just mentioned these as a few in order to remember that we have some success stories to learn from. The Montreal Protocol is today a universal international legal instrument. UNEP supports in all developing nations ozone offices. New technologies have come in, new markets have been created. We transformed a problem into a solution because we were able to bring science and policy and technology and finance together under the auspices of the United Nations. On so many fronts, we can also look back to the last few decades in each one of your nations. You have today a United Nations Environment Assembly that can invite a minister responsible for the environment from every country and member state of the United Nations. You have environmental institutions, environmental legislations. In over 100 countries, the right to a healthy environment is today a constitutionally enshrined right of our citizens. We have seen technologies help us move forward. We have begun to see whole economies change. We have also seen protected areas beginning to arrest an otherwise blind approach to destroying biodiversity. There are thousands, millions of partnerships, of leadership and of actions that we should draw on and learn from in order to not freeze in the face of the challenge that is now before us. I would like us to acknowledge that we have progressed, if not yet succeeded, and that is the harsh truth. An executive director speaking to the ministers of environment in the year 2016 cannot but tell you that on virtually every metric at a global level, we have not turned the corner. In fact, just on air pollution, in the last 5 years, the situation has deteriorated by another 8%, leading to, as our sister agency WHO estimates, to 7 to 8 million people dying prematurely. Imagine for a moment 7 million people lining up from here to wherever it would take them to show the number of people who are victims of our way of managing our societies and economies in the name of development. And that number of 7 million is the price that we pay as societies for an unwillingness, inability, and inertia to not address these issues. And yes, sometimes it is also, when you're a developing nation, difficult to get the latest technology, to have the funding. But what we should never allow ourselves to do, because of these legacies from the past, is to have environment ministers at a United Nations Environment Assembly disagree over the priority that this issue deserves, whoever and wherever you may be in charge of the environment. Because 7 to 8 million people, and that is just one example alongside so many others, is an unjustifiable, it is actually an immoral price to pay in the name of development. We need to begin to also believe in our capacity to change these things, because that is my point. If you look back over the last 44 years, we have come a long way. And the success stories are also the seeds of our agenda to implement 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement, and many of the other issues. Imagine for a moment a world in 2050 where we would reduce air pollution to such an extent that, at least in terms of killing people, we could proudly say it is not our cars, our factories, the use of biomass in homes in terms of women having to cook and using biofuels with a consequence on their respiratory systems and their children, that we have created access to clean energy at the household level of rural households, that we have made the vehicle industry deliver on a promise that they have been selling us on the billboards for the past 10 years, but as we have learned recently, have in some instances only sold a story and not cleaner cars. We have a long way to go to also make our energy systems not be something that destroys the environment and impacts on human health. I imagine a world in 2050 where countries such as Kenya will be 100% renewable, where, for instance, countries such as Germany or Portugal or Denmark that already managed for a few hours this year to produce close to 100% of their electricity need with renewables will have made the transition to at least a power sector that is 100% renewable. I imagine a world also in 2050 which is perfectly realistic, where losing 30% of the food we produce and waste it along the way of the supply chain and all the way into our households will have become a thing of the past. These are things that are eminently achievable, and they are not the prerogative of one group of countries or of the wealthier in our societies. It is in fact when we manage to link the wealth and the capacity of the rich to act with the necessity and also the importance for the poor to act, that we actually can make these changes happen. So a world in 2050 is not unimaginable in terms of many of these targets. In fact, if you look at the exponentially increasing success that we are achieving, then we have every reason to believe that it can be done. But not if we continue to debate about whether we should be doing it, or debate about who in our world community should be leading and who should be following. This is a leadership challenge that has to rise to the challenge of something that I often quote as living in the age of the Anthropocene, an age where we collectively as humanity over the last 100, 200 years have become a geologically traceable factor in the future of this world. Somewhere in the year 2500, archaeologists will be able to trace the presence of modern human industrialized society in the geology of this planet. In fact, that is a debate that is currently underway. But whatever we may call it, what does it actually try to say? That we live in an age and at a moment in time where those things that are beginning to go wrong are beginning to go wrong on such a scale and at such a speed that we cannot approach them in the way that we have done in the past. We cannot continue to fix one problem after another, tackle one chemical with one protocol or one convention after another. Every issue that we know about today cannot in itself create an entire institutional infrastructure to address it. The environmental movement was forced for many decades to focus on problems, first of all local, then national, and increasingly global by necessity. The big switch that I urge you all to also think about as you work with UNEA in the years to come is to move from problem solving and the environment minister being the man or the woman with the big finger who points at the error of ways of the others, to accept that actually your role and your capacity is to be solution providers. It is in our understanding of the planet and its link to human needs, to technology and science, that your portfolios today are not only to point at what is going wrong, but rather to provide the foundations upon which sustainable development can succeed in the future. We need to move to systemic solutions, not to single problem solving. We also need to learn in our community to not always focus on what it is that we disagree over, whether it is the conservation community, whether it is the climate change community, the chemicals and waste community. First of all, they attract passion in each one of them. But if we want to achieve the kind of decarbonization, reducing waste, achieving transitions to cleaner energy, we're not going to achieve this by thinking that we can somehow work either in isolation from one another or far worse, by detracting from one another. This debate is as true between developed and developing nations as it is between the rich and the poor, the urban and the rural, the conservation NGOs who believe in one philosophy of managing wildlife and the conservation community who believes in another philosophy. Environmental communities are as good at being divided as they are also sometimes dividing our societies. Our role, our challenge, and this is where you as ministers of environment have such a critical role to play, is to unify, first of all, the knowledge and the science. Secondly, a public and transparent debate in our societies about the choices, together with the solutions and the options we have, and then to align societies behind this approach. The United Nations Environment Assembly is a litmus test of this. It is not difficult to think of a world of 7 billion people, 193 nations being deeply divided and therefore not being able to act. It is in fact a phenomenon why we have a United Nations in the first place. And we should always remember that this United Nations was born in a moment when the world looked at a truly terrible episode in its history, where it learned in a bitter and brutal way what the price of conflict can be to people, to nations, to our communities. UNEA's role has taken us to a new chapter. I am firmly convinced that heads of state and government at Rio +20 did not just say, well, let's strengthen and upgrade UNEP. Seems to be a paragraph somewhere here. No, there was an intense discussion, and it was the heads of state and government who said environment has become either such a key problem or such a fundamental part of the way we think of our economies in the future and our need to work together as nations so central that we need a strengthened and upgraded UNEP, and that a universal membership assembly should be established. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I wonder if you are really conscious of the fact that in the history of the United Nations, you are the only other assembly in the Secretariat of the United Nations for which nations have accorded universal membership. Please reflect on that for a moment. Yes, let us do it. This is an extraordinary responsibility. It confers upon you also a duty. Now, as the leaders of your countries in this assembly, to think of what this means for environmental governance, for our ability to address the issues that are at the forefront. Now, we may call UNEA the voice of the environment, or the world's parliament for the environment, or the guardian of our environment. You can choose many different terms. But there is no question that you are the only assembly in our world today that has been authorized by the only universal membership body in this world, the United Nations General Assembly, to be the leading authority on environment. In that sense, let me quote yesterday's unplugged session in which Madame Ebticha brought a very simple adage: unity in diversity, diversity in unity. I could not think of a better motto for the United Nations, and indeed for the United Nations Environment Assembly, because whether we talk in biological terms, in political terms, cultural or technological terms, unity in diversity and diversity in unity is what will make this assembly rise to the challenge. This assembly has behind it the United Nations Environment Programme, but its mandate is well beyond governing the work programme of the United Nations Environment Programme. It is actually the mandate to be the Environment Assembly in the United Nations, from which you will also address the entire UN system. Your challenge over the coming years, perhaps, will be to find and give that voice of the environment the authority that will also register on the Richter scale of a high-level political forum, of the permanent missions in New York, of the General Assembly, of ECOSOC, and indeed of the world audience that looks to you for guidance, for leadership, and therefore for the ability to reach well beyond instructing a secretariat. And that, I would say to you, Excellencies, is a big difference. You used to have a governing council that governed an environment program of the United Nations and managed miraculously over the years to use it to provide leadership to the world. But today you have an environment assembly that looks after UNEP, but also looks after the world of environment well beyond the Secretariat. But since this is my last opportunity to address you also as Executive Director, let me just reflect for a couple of moments on this United Nations Environment Programme. You have a world of problems, but you also have a universe of solutions. The role that I believe is central to the United Nations Environment Programme and to its Secretariat is to be that science policy interface, and not just to have discussions, but to enable science where it emerges and begins to alert us to a problem, to connect to you as the policymakers, and for us as a Secretariat and a United Nations family also, because of the 2030 agenda, to offer you solutions and pathways for being able to move forward. It is at that interface of science and policy that UNEP and also the Governing Council and the United Nations have had some of their most successful moments in history. So let us build on that and realize that you have this body available to you. And we have demonstrated in the last few years through the appointment of a chief scientist, through hosting the Climate Clean Air Coalition, through helping IPBS to be established, through hosting the Climate Technology Center Network, through producing the GEO reports and the first generation of GEO-regional reports being here, for helping the world understand what the meaning of short-lived climate pollutants is when scientists were knocking on our door in the early 2000s and saying, we think we have something here that is problematic but could also be a solution. Just like 30 years ago, it was climate scientists who met here in Nairobi. And then together with our sister organization, the World Meteorological Organization, gave birth to the IPCC. These are the examples of how I believe UNEP is delivering, and delivering on a basis unprecedented probably in its history, not least because you as member states and many of our partners have over the last 10 years increased the funding for UNEP's work by almost 100%. Let me here also say that it is one of my issues of pride of how our teams have not interpreted that extra funding as a license to increase a secretariat's size and staffing. Please note, if you look into the United Nations system and you often ask the question, effectiveness, value for money, efficiency, please take note of the fact that this organization, with twice as much money, is implementing a program with less staff than it did in the year 2006. I would love to see other organizations be able to demonstrate that, and that is a compliment. It is because we understand that our role has to evolve. Our business strategy, if you want, has evolved, and we have made it the DNA of UNEP not to seek to be an alternative provider of project services. Our role is to bring science to policy, enable innovation to be driven, and through that innovation enable new solutions to emerge that either we sometimes may be experimenting with partner countries in implementing or with industries, but most of the time it is your ministries who are our partners, our clients, and also the non-governmental organizations, the networks of business leaders who actually make the change happen. You have a fantastic secretariat, and to Eric Solheim I said, it is something to become an Under-Secretary General in the United Nations, to be appointed the Executive Director of a United Nations program. Now, what you will hear and what you will probably often arrive at is a sense of trepidation, that bureaucracy, that administrative system, the political inertia, the divisions. But let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to hand to my successor in the year 2016 an outstanding secretariat. It is full of people who believe in the mission, are respectful of their mandate, and are innovators. We have entrepreneurs who work in this secretariat, and I would urge you, do not punish UNEP sometimes when it makes mistakes. If you want a truly cutting-edge secretariat that serves you, you must sometimes also accept that it will not always get it right. And that is a culture in our multilateral system that is not very well nurtured. It is one that we in the bureaucracy have internalized so much that taking a risk is sometimes interpreted as the most stupid act you could try to undertake as a UN civil servant. What a fatal error in judgment. It is because we have people who believe, because we have some of the best people across the different sectors working for you, and that I am proud to have given that sense of entrepreneurial opportunity to lead us who cannot see the solution yet, but know that they're onto the right thing. That freedom that you also gave me in my tenure as Executive Director has a great deal to do with why you, I hope, believe you have a United Nations Environment Programme today that is far from meeting your needs. But wherever it can, it meets your needs with great professionalism, with integrity, with trust, and deeply rooted in an understanding that an environmental problem in New York or Berlin or Tokyo may in scientific terms be the same problem in New Delhi or somewhere in Johannesburg or here in Nairobi. But neither the solution nor the partnerships nor the approach have to be identical, and very often actually will be very different. And as we look at this transition towards a greener economy, as we look at the green economy in the context of sustainable development and poverty eradication, as we look at the work that UNEP is undertaking to understand also the frontiers of how finance will enable you not just to be seen as a burden to the taxpayer, but actually an asset, a resource, a return on investment, it is here that we also begin to understand that the future role of your ministries, of our environment program, must be rooted in an understanding that the solutions to most of the challenges that we observe lie not within the mandate of an environment ministry or organization, but in how we bring the expertise, the technology, and the understanding to those who can actually solve the problem. It may be the Minister of Agriculture, of Transport, of Power and Energy, but it may also be the Central Bank of Kenya, the Reserve Bank of India, or it may be the Finance Ministry in a country such as Germany. The role of a modern environmental organization has to be to empower others who have the mandate in sectoral terms to do a better job than we have collectively done in the past. Mr. President, as I come to the end of my presentation, let me once again thank, first of all, my predecessors, and through them, all those who have come before us. I have always been very conscious of the fact that, those of us who sit here today are so much more fortunate, so much more empowered to do what we can do. There are generations before us, whether in your ministry, your NGO, or in the United Nations, who had it so much harder. This was a coffee farm in 1972. Some countries thought that they had relegated UNEP somewhere in Africa to a coffee farm. Here we are in the year 2016, a United Headquarters duty station, a United Nations Environment Programme, a United Nations Environment Assembly, over 500 multilateral environmental agreements. And our role as UNEP today sometimes can be to help, for instance, the African continent develop the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative and secure $10 billion in commitments at Paris in order to be able to double renewable energy in the next 4 years and give millions of people access to energy in Africa while solving an environmental problem. That opportunity is built on the work and sometimes the very painful work of many who went before us. I want to thank the UNEP staff in the Secretariat, who have been a remarkable group of people. To my left sits Ibrahim Thiaw, our Deputy Executive Director. We run this organization as a team, a senior management team, and in fact as a team of just about 850, or if I add also my colleagues in the MEAs, of just about 1,300 staff members. That's less than some of the waste collection companies have in a medium-sized city. That is the UNEP Secretariat working with tremendous enthusiasm and a commitment that I hope you sense also during this week here. I want to thank you as our member states for allowing me and my team to try and transform UNEP's business, but also strategy, and to help you prepare for Rio+20, which I think in many respects was the first true governance reform of this program in 40 years. And I want to recognize in you as member states, particularly civil servants. There are many in this hall, and you could see them last night in the middle of the night. You are extraordinary people. I think those who often say, at these conferences, it's all talk. This week already, you have spent nights working here. In your ministries, you prepare decisions. You are the backbone of the world's environmental governance system, and that I want to thank you for. The environmental movement as a whole, often maligned, ridiculed, punished, some executed, lost their lives. That environmental community that has in some ways been our social license to even be here. I want to acknowledge them and the many who lost their lives on that journey to taking us here today, and where unfortunately we still face often the need to also to protect the protectors of the environment. And I appeal to you as ministers and as the United Nations Environment Assembly, do not forget those who are not yet able to sit in a conference room and negotiate as equals across the desk. Let me also thank my Secretary General and my colleagues in the United Nations system, many of them here this week. They have been remarkable colleagues to work with. They have often helped me to understand things that I simply could not understand when I arrived in the UN, and you can imagine how big that pile was. I thank the Secretary General for the confidence of having allowed me to serve him and the United Nations system also as Chairman of the Chief Executive Board, and also for a period as Director General of UNON. Let me then also acknowledge one more person without whom I would not be here. And in my policy statement that I hope you have received, I end with his quote, Kofi Annan. It was he who 10 years ago persuaded me, who did not ever see himself becoming a United Nations Under-Secretary General, that this was the place to be. I thank him, I thank you, and I thank you for the privilege of having served you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner, for those inspiring words and for taking us to value the past, because without that, we are not going to be able to set a promising future. I thank you. It's a privilege that I have now in this scenario to say goodbye to you. Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and warm welcome to the Ministerial Dialogue on the overarching theme of delivering on the environment dimensions of the 2030 Agenda. This morning, interactive dialogues addresses commonalities and complementarities, joining forces for a more effective delivery of the 2030 Agenda. You have the guiding questions before you in the background note. This session is aimed at identifying how commonalities and complementarities among the implementation of international agreements can be promoted in order to ensure the integrated and effective implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the role that ministers and stakeholders play in strengthening that implementation. We have also have an opportunity to learn from one another, draw from best practices, and assess needs and gaps that need to be filled. I invite our distinguished speakers this morning to provide brief framing interventions for discussions. After the interventions, I may follow up immediately after with specific related questions, inviting the distinguished ministers to keep their replies to no more than 2 minutes long. It is my honor to give the floor to Mr. Chen Jining, Minister of Environmental Protection of the People's Republic of China and host of the 2016 G20 Summit. Mr. Jining, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm most delighted to have this opportunity to join our ministerial colleagues from around the world to find a way to deliver the environmental dimension of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. China was among the first to put forward and implement the strategy for sustainable development. In the past 15 years, China has worked relentlessly towards achieving MDGs and have made solid progress. This is reflected in our grain output increase for 12 years in a row, which enables us to feed close to 20% of the world's population with less than 10% of the world's arable land. Since 2000, we have provided safe drinking water to 470 million rural residents. We've completed afforestation of more than 60 million hectares. The proportion of acid rain areas was reduced from a peak level of around 30% to 8.8% in 2015. Energy consumption and CO2 emission per unit of GDP was cut by 18% and 20% respectively. All this has enhanced people's livelihood and welfare and contributed tremendously to global sustainable development efforts. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development depicts a new vision for global sustainable development. Last September, President Xi Jinping made a solemn commitment at the UN Summit that China will take upon itself to implement the 2030 Agenda and work as a catalyst for sustained global development. This is the first year of China's 13th five-year plan. It happens to coincide with that of the SDGs. Its overarching principle, goals, and vision are also highly synchronized with that of SDGs. All this provides an enabling environment for China's implementation of SDGs, which have been fully incorporated into our development plans. In our 13th five-year plan, we stress a green, open and sharing development philosophy featuring innovation and coordination. The ultimate purpose of our development is to enhance people's welfare and promote the all-round development of our citizens. Eco-civilization and green development have been embedded into every aspect of our socio-economic development, with a focus on improving the efficiency and effectiveness of development to make it more equitable and sustainable. This fully speaks to the principle and purpose of sustainable development. A particular case in point is the set of clearly defined quantitative indicators for China's sustainable development, providing important evidence for monitoring, evaluation, and assessment of plans concerned. Under resource and environment, we set out 16 targets, about a half of the total, and almost all binding targets. In other words, they shall be considered as part of the merits for local government assessment and must be delivered on time as scheduled. They are reducing water use, energy consumption, and CO2 emission per unit of GDP, cutting down the percentage of polluted water bodies, lowering the concentration of particulate matters, expanding the share of non-fossil fuel consumption, and enlarging forest coverage, to name just a few. Once fulfilled, China will serve as an unstoppable catalyst for the delivery of the environmental dimension of the global SDGs. To do so, China will center on improving environmental quality, focus on resolving prominent eco and environmental issues, and step up its efforts on the protection of the ecosystem. First, more rigorous spatial control of national territory. Measures include marking and defining of ecological red lines, greater protection of areas barring development, and measures to relocate population and industries from areas of major eco-importance or ecological fragilities so as to lessen the intensity of economic activities there. Second, a fundamental shift in the way to use resources. An integrated management approach will be applied and strengthened to build a clean and low-carbon energy system that is safe and efficient. Circular economy that penetrates production, circulation, and consumption will be further enhanced. Third, intensified environmental governance. Action plans to prevent and control pollution related to air, water, and land will be thoroughly implemented. Vigorous efforts are underway to rein in the total amount of pollutants to meet the reduction criteria and put the overall pollution under control. Environmental infrastructure will be upgraded and green and environmentally friendly industries will be fully fledged. Fourth, more intensive work on eco-protection and restoration. Afforestation activities are scaled up, so are measures to return more areas to forests and grasslands. River basins are subject to a systematic approach for improvement. Nature reserves are to be better managed to enable greater biodiversity. Fifth, robust response to global climate change. Carbon emission in key sectors are put under effective control. Low carbon development is progressing across key areas. There will be further engagement with the global climate governance to materialize our reduction commitments in a conscientious way. Mr. President, the government has a sober will and solid resolve to build eco-civilization and facilitate sustainable development. A robust framework and action plan is in place. We have high faith in the delivery of the environmental dimension of SDGs. We are also deeply aware that its achievement entails full guarantee at the institutional, financial, and capacity levels, as well as closer integration with domestic development. A tighter nexus is in urgent need for the global family. We are ready to join hands with the rest of the global community to push for the achievement of the environmental goals and targets under the SDGs and play our due part for a better future for the human beings. We also look forward to UNEP and UNEA for their more active and effective engagement in this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Yeah, something is wrong with this mic. It was really pleased to me to learn about the advance that the People's Republic of China has made in relation to incorporate the environmental dimension into the policy-making process. And I think 5-year planning and the way you are approaching your own problems and the way you are viewing the solutions, and I think it's a learning experience that we have to learn from. Ahora, I move to Spanish. Escucharemos.
I now call on the Minister Alba Rosa Perez Montoya, Minister of Science, Technology and Environment of Cuba. Madam Minister. Thank you very much to the Executive Director. Thank you to all the ministers, representatives. We thank the Government of Kenya for their welcome to ensure the successful holding of this meeting, and also to the Secretariat of UNEP for organizing this meeting. After 2 decades of economic and imbalance and social imbalance at the world level with this environmental impact, we are in a better position today to invert the tremendous damage done to our Mother Earth. And this calls for the implementation in a coherent and integrated manner at the national level and at the international level, the various commitments entered into, both in terms of sustainable development and the principal multilateral environmental agreements, particularly for climate change, biodiversity, desertification, and chemicals. There can be no doubt that the Agenda for Sustainable Development 2030, given its broad scope, can facilitate and encourage this integration at the national level while raising challenges for environment ministries in individual countries. The first of these challenges is to identify the national legal standards that's from the environmental focus will contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and also filling the existing legal gaps. It is possible also that some legal regulations will need to be updated. In Cuba's case, we have identified the need to update one of the most important standards regarding the Environmental Act 81. Secondly, we need to establish or update development plans, policies and strategies also that contribute to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and also facilitate the solution of environmental issues that currently exist. And these plans will call for closer integration involvement of ministries and national institutions, where the environment ministers must play an important and pioneering role. The establishment of networks, programs, and mega projects at the national level can contribute to achieving that end. Some of the objectives are linked to areas such as agriculture, health, education, and energy. On occasion, these are the responsibility of one single ministry or fall within the remit of different ministries. However, in each case, there are policies involved regarding environmental protection, and their coordinated action is requisite. Another priority challenge is to identify the economic impact of environmental issues and national indicators to measure achievement of goals based on available data. We must maintain a closer relationship with the authorities responsible for statistics to ensure that these are harmonized with international indicators. We must gather domestic data and disseminate this information. We cannot forget the role of science, technology, and innovation in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, particularly on the environmental front. In Cuba, our scientific studies on the impact of climate change in future scenarios up to 2050 and further, and the National Inventory on Biological Diversity, among other instruments, have allowed us to clarify strategies and policies and will serve as a basis for decision-making. So I would like to end my statement with a brief analysis of the subject from the international angle, given the impact of such issues on developing countries. In terms of sustainable development, our governments are faced with the dual challenge of attaining sustainability with economic growth in the future, while simultaneously resolving the long-standing accumulated problems in the situation of the current economic order. This calls not only for political determination, but also resources. But we do have financial resources and technological resources that will allow us to guarantee the right to education, to health, food, housing, and jobs of current and future generations. But what is the use of commitments if we don't give them effect? National efforts that we make will not be reflected in sustainable growth, real sustainable growth, unless we take real action to ensure that the developing countries have access to clean technologies and have additional financing, new financing that is not earmarked or conditioned. I think that this Assembly has a responsibility to, with its outcomes, guarantee a response to these questions. And allow me to end by reminding everybody of words of the historic leader of our revolution, Fidel Ramos, in 2004, and I quote, "Dreaming of things that are impossible is called utopia. Fighting to achieve objectives not only that can be achieved, but that are essential to the survival of the species, that is called realism." Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora.
Thank you very much to you, Madam Minister.
En su participación.
You, Your Excellency, talked about the role of science. And we have come to a point in our world today that we have very little margin of maneuver left, and so it is increasingly pressing to ensure that science is incorporated in underpinning the decisions we take on the political front. And we have very little margin for maneuver in climate change. We need public policies that are just on a whim. No, these have to be based, public policy must be based on science. In your experience, what are the tools that are needed to implement the Agenda 2030, particularly in terms of science, technology? What would your reaction be to that question? Thank you, sir. That's an interesting question. I think there are 5 tools that we could use. Firstly, participation in a sustained but increasing manner. That is, involvement of scientists, all those who are involved in this subject area. And not only their participation, but what we can also do is more widely disseminate results. And I think that this is very important in all countries. We must take this into account. In Cuba, let me just say briefly, we have a macro project that involves over 100 scientists and institutions throughout the country, which has allowed us to, up to 2050 and beyond, forecast possible scenarios so that we can base our action on science, and that's essential. And also training of human resources to deal with these issues, because each country should have its own, should develop its own potential. Of course, you can interact with other countries. Another facet, legal tools. Now, here we need to update our legislation based on current circumstances, and I draw attention to the number of legal standards at different levels that need to be reviewed, revised, in the current context and under current circumstances and situations. Another important tool are our institutions. I feel that each country, notwithstanding the international tools that may be developed, at the domestic level, countries must, through their government's political determination, develop their own tools that they can implement based on the outcome of research. And another important tool is another one that's been referred to here, talking about capacity building and financing. If we fail to implement measures in the short, medium, and long term, and if we fail to reflect the progress that's being made and implement it, then we're not going to move forward. And so, briefly, those are the 5 essential tools that I feel are requisite to make progress.
Dr. Joan Claude.
I now invite Mr. Johan Kloos, Secretary General of Habitat 3 Conference and Executive Director of the United Nations Human Settlements Programme. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to address this assembly and explain a little bit about the contributions by UN Habitat, and particularly the Habitat 3 conference to be held in Quito in October, and the debate on sustainability. The cities know that we can make a tremendous contribution to environmental issues. Some 70% of greenhouse gases could be affected. And so our organization as a whole has a major role to play in combating climate change and in designing a better future for our citizens. This goes hand in hand with the intrinsic problems of urbanization in the world of today, town and country planning, which are, of course, extremely grave and numerous. The Habitat Conference is held every 20 years, and so we take advantage of this occasion to analyze what has happened in the area of urbanization and planning over the last 20 years. So we've taken a sampling of countries, cities throughout the world, seeking objective scientific data, and our analysis with satellite photographs, we've analyzed developments of urbanization. And what we've observed and concluded from our observations, unfortunately, is not happy conclusions. We have seen that the built surface area is growing faster than population growth. We have seen larger and larger surfaces of urban land. This is triggered by speculation for financial reasons. With the increase in the urban land area throughout the world, growing faster than the urban population, we'd find ourselves with an average density that is declining. But urbanization costs, average per capita, increasing, because as density declines, the per capita urbanization costs increase. And so we have very negative effects on the urbanized structure. And these have accumulated and increased over the last 20 years. Urbanization, in addition, we are aware, generates wealth and prosperity. Speculation demonstrates that urbanization generates wealth. Certainly, it generates value added. And therefore, we find ourselves on the horns of a dilemma. For many countries, it's necessary to manage urbanization to generate prosperity for the national economy. And so the opportunity for many countries, particularly poor countries, they have the opportunity to see urbanization as an instrument of development. However, in practice, we see that the urbanization that really occurs is not designed in optimum fashion to generate this desired prosperity. And so frequently, unfortunately, what does happen is that rapid urbanization is not planned, it's spontaneous, and it generates very little value added compared with what urbanization could potentially be generating.
This is a serious problem because the majority of urbanization throughout the world is taking place in developing countries, and therefore those are the countries which need and which appreciate development the most. And therefore we are witnessing an epidemic of low-quality urbanization, which does not produce the hoped-for benefits. What are the measures that we should take as quickly as possible in order to revert the situation? I believe that we have to reinvent urban planning and urban design. We need to go back to having urban planning and urban design at the heart of the public policies of our governments, who want to change urbanism into a tool for development. Unfortunately, over the last 20 years, the practice of urban planning and the design of cities, instead of increasing, has decreased. Over the last several years, what has increased is informal urbanization and spontaneous building, and this represents a risk for human beings as a whole, because it can cause much more pockets of poverty and creating all sorts of risks from there. How can we reinvent urban planning? We need to reinvent urban planning on the basis of 3 important points. One is the design of legislation and norms and regulations regarding urbanization. Urbanization is based on the law, and urbanization that isn't properly regulated cannot be effectively done. Regulation is not only an issue of creating laws, but to make sure that they are enforced. If legislation is not actually implemented, it's better not to have such regulation, because unenforced regulation diminishes the moral authority of the government concerned. So this is a crucial issue to deal with urbanization problems. So the legislative and regulatory pillar is an important foundation. The second important aspect is the physical design. what traditionally was known as urban planning. That is the design of the streets, the parks, etc., which unfortunately has also disappeared over the last few decades. And the reason for its disappearance is because there is not sufficient will and political and administrative capacity to negotiate and to impose an urban plan that functions well. The third fundamental pillar is the financial design for urbanization. Urbanization implies costs. It requires resources for its management, and on many occasions, urbanization is designed without the relevant financial support. And in those cases, it collapses and loses all of the value that urbanization could contribute to the national economy. So we have a challenge here. We have to revise these three basic pillars relating to urbanization. And common sense, oftentimes, and the comments that are in common parlance about urbanization insist that urbanization is the responsibility of the mayors. It is true, I was mayor myself. I've also been minister of the central government. And I'm not going to deny the fundamental role that local administration plays. Without local administration, there cannot be any type of urbanization. However, here I would like to make an appeal to national governments, because the national governments have much more responsibility than they believe in terms of urbanization throughout their countries, because the national government establishes the rules of the game, establishes the power relative to the local authorities, the financing for the local authorities, and the legal norms for urbanization. It also establishes the policies for basic redistribution across the country. And so therefore, if the national government is not fully aware of its responsibility in urban quality, then we are facing a very serious problem, because the mayors are not in a position to be able to face on their own these enormous challenges. In this country, $6 per capita per year per city. And I would like to suggest that you imagine what capacity can a mayor have who has a budget of $6 per capita annually in order to manage whichever problem may come up on an urban level. So therefore, one of the priorities that the new urban agenda that we're going to design in Quito needs to bring to light is the necessary cooperation between the three levels of government: central, regional, and local, if we wish to be serious in putting right and dealing with the challenges of our cities in the 21st century. And one of those challenges is, without a doubt, climate change. You know that cities have given an example of fighting in favor of policies that will improve the sustainability of our societies and of our economies. And they have often been the driving force, the mayors, for this. One of the things that mayors are doing for climate change is that without economic resources, imagine what they would be able to do if they had a healthier financial budget in order to deal with climate change. I would like to state here that we have ended one stage, in my view, that is the involvement of local government in the matter of climate change. And now we have to make a quantum leap to the second phase, the second challenge, which is that local governments hope to play a role in climate change, and in that way, citizens can be the owners of their own utilities. We believe that at the current moment, one fundamental factor which is very disruptive to achieve widespread use of renewable fuel is that cities can go back to what we saw during last century, playing a crucial role in the generation of energy. And they can generate energy not only from waste, not only from their solid waste, but also wind energy and solar energy, amongst others. So the quantum leap that we hope to see from cities in the ambition of them playing an active role is that they take up once again the capacity, the legal capacity of becoming the owners of the utilities that generate energy. This is a pragmatic measure that we are proposing and putting on the table, and which is being practiced in various parts of the world. That with this link with the local authorities in generation of energy with renewable sources, then cities can take another leap beyond the policies that they have already undertaken. I will conclude by stating that I want to note in my statement, with very special thanks, my colleague Achim Steiner for all of his collaboration to UN Habitat over the last 10 years. He's been a great companion. The executive director here of UNEP works alongside UN Habitat. These are the headquarters in Nairobi of these two programs. And as the head of UN Habitat, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to him and to say that beyond our friendship as colleagues in our directorships on our agendas, we have been able to create a personal friendship that goes far beyond our work duties as we lead these two institutions, and I do hope that it will last for the rest of our lives. Thank you, Achim, for all your collaboration and friendship.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Close, for that statement on the issues relating to urban development. We can't speak about sustainable development if we don't mention urban development, and it's a paradigm that we need to include in our planning.
This session this morning, I would like to, because we are running out of time here and they are waiting for us for lunch, so I would like to tell you that at 3 o'clock, when we begin the afternoon session, we're going to start with G77 and China, and then EU, and then we open up, Denmark, Philippines, Tonga, Republic of Kiribati, India, Netherlands, Sri Lanka, and then on, we have 29 countries wanted to take the floor. So let's come back at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and let's have a good lunch. Thank you. Session is adjourned.